Good afternoon, everyone. You're very welcome to this EBD Academy webinar on understanding the ATU French Early Access Programme. This webinar will be moderated by Justin Stindt, who's the Managing Director of Justin Stindt Consulting. Justin is an international expert in market access and reimbursement, and he's also the trainer for EBD Academy's course on pricing and reimbursement strategies for Europe and the US. Which is beginning next month in July. Justin will be speaking for around about 20 minutes today. There will be an opportunity for questions at the end of his presentation. If you would like to ask a question, please submit it in the questions tab on your screen. I'll now hand you over to Justin.
Great, thank you very much. Hi everyone, my name is Justin. Thank you very much for joining this webinar. As we said, I'm the Managing Director of Justin Stindt Consulting. We are a consulting firm specializing in pricing and reimbursement. So we help our clients determine what clinical evidence is needed in order to get new products reimbursed and secure attractive pricing for them. Just a couple of words on my bio. I was previously at GlaxoSmithKline in various market access and commercial director roles, and before I worked for another consultancy. And I have the pleasure of being the moderator for this webinar today, but also the trainer for the EBD Academy course on pricing and reimbursement strategies. And the reason we picked this topic is that when talking about the French market, a lot of people think about a very morose atmosphere. There's a lot of talk about price cuts, payers denying new products access, or very significant delays in access. And these things, they are all true. They do happen in the French market, but there's also another side to the French market. And actually, for truly innovative products that offer a real benefit to patients and respond to an unmet need, France is actually one of the most generous, if not the most generous market in the world, because you have the possibility of a reimbursed early access program. So you can actually start selling a new drug way before it even receives marketing authorization. So there are multiple upsides to this that we will go through today, but also a number of pitfalls to avoid. So the objective for today is really to help you understand the ATU, the French Early Access Program. And my objectives for today are to give you an overview of the opportunities for early access and reimbursement in France, walk you through the ATU program process and key characteristics, also make you aware of some recent changes in the program. So even if you've heard of the ATU in the past or may have had experience with the ATU program in the past, there have been some very recent changes that have significantly changed the rules of the game that you should be aware of. And I would also like to show you some analog examples of drugs that utilize the ATU pathway. And we'll actually see a couple of examples of products that achieved reimbursed market access in France even before the US. So some of you may know this, and I don't want to dwell too much on this, but I just wanted to show you where to place the ATU. So in France, in order to get reimbursed market access, this is actually quite a lengthy process that involves a number of process steps. So it all starts typically with the marketing authorization, which in most cases today goes through the centralized procedure via the EMA, which is then just rubber stamped, more or less, if you want to call it so, by the French regulatory agency, the ANSM. And then manufacturers have to submit a dossier to the HAS, which will conduct an evaluation of the therapeutic benefit, issue the so-called SMR and ASMR rating as part of its assessment. Some products also have to submit an additional economic dossier to the so-called CEESP. And then once these appraisals are available, you have to enter into price negotiations with the CEPS, which is actually a subdirectorate of the Ministry of Health. And only when the price is agreed and is actually published in the French official journal, that is the moment when the reimbursement will actually start. So typically the process takes 8 to 9 months, but we have seen examples of products when there's no agreement on the price, the negotiations, they can actually go on for years. And while there is a significant time lag for a lot of products between marketing authorization and the actual reimbursement, there is the opportunity for innovative drugs with no appropriate alternative to actually be reimbursed way before the marketing authorization through the early access program ATU. So the ATU, I would like to tell you a bit more about this program and also the sub-distinction. So ATU stands for Temporary Use Authorization in France. It's a program that allows for early access to drugs whose clinical profile suggests that they would be beneficial for individual patients or groups of patients. And in the spirit of the ATU, and this has recently been reinforced, the authorities would like to make sure that a request for marketing authorization has either been filed or will be filed within a set period of time. So you can request the ATU program before you have filed for marketing authorization, but it is supposed to be a temporary state in the lead up to the regular marketing authorization. And the ATU actually comes in two forms. There is the so-called nominative ATU. So the nominative ATU is only for a single patient and is only at the request of the treating physician. So the treating physicians can submit a request to the ANSM to treat a patient with an unlicensed medicine, and then if that is granted, the product can be prescribed and can, for example, be imported from another country if it is not available in France, or the patient can be treated. But for manufacturers, actually the more interesting variant is the so-called cohort ATU. So cohort ATU means that this is applicable for a group of patients, or it could be a subgroup of patients in the indication in question. It is actually issued at the request of the holder of the distributing rights. So either the manufacturer or the French distributor can submit the request, and it can be renewed annually. And drugs that are part of the cohort ATU are reimbursed. So the French Social Security actually pays for them already ahead of marketing authorization. It will allow the manufacturers to provide patients access to innovative medicines and actually be reimbursed in advance of the regular marketing authorization and pricing and reimbursement process in France. The relevant authority for this is the ANSM, so the French regulatory agency that we have already alluded to earlier. Here you have to submit a dossier that the ANSM will evaluate, and key aspects for the evaluation are the pharmaceutical quality, safety and efficacy of the product. Also, detailed information regarding the planned indication and product characteristics is required, and the availability of therapeutic alternatives plays a key role for the ATU application. We don't have time to go into all the details. There is actually a document available in English that has some information about the ATU application and the process. And in a way, a lot of the documents that have to be submitted are actually quite similar to the documents that have to be submitted to the regulatory authorities, or what you would submit to the EMA actually. And you can actually find a lot of information about the ATU on the website of the ANSM. Unfortunately, most of it is available in French only. So sorry about that. The screenshots here, they are all in French. I will walk you through some of the key features, but by any means, if you have questions, do not hesitate to contact us about more information about the website. But you will most likely need a French speaker or somebody who can help you translate some of the key parts. And essentially, on the website of the ANSM, you can find the full list of products for which nominative ATUs have been granted. So in the screenshot that you see here, this is actually the website where you see all the lists available for download. So these are Excel files that will include information such as the therapy area, the drug name, the active substance, the manufacturer, and whether the product is for hospital use only. But then you will also find the list of the cohort ATUs granted, the list of past cohort ATUs, and the list of cohort ATUs rejected. Here is a screenshot from the page that actually shows you the list of the ongoing cohort ATUs. So the ANSM will show the latest updates. So here you can see some products actually just got the cohort ATU that was granted on the 18th of June, so very hot off the press. And just below that, you will find the full list that you can click through. And when you click on a specific product, it will actually take you to the product specific page where you will find more information, including the indication that is approved in the scope of the cohort ATU, but also additional information. So I will show you an example on the next slide. So here I've just picked the latest one that was actually just approved. So this is a Brigatinib from Takeda, which has just received the cohort ATU. And what you will find here is the active substance, the holder of the cohort ATU, which in this case here is Takeda France, the status, so it will tell you the date that the ATU was granted, and the actual start of the ATU. So the actual start date when the manufacturer started supplying it was the 18th of June. You will see the therapeutic indication, the CIP code, so that's a little bit technical, but these are essentially the identifiers for the boxes, and then a number of reference documents. So there is a therapeutic use protocol that is always defined in the scope of the ATU, and also the information that has to be gathered. There is the summary of product characteristics and the leaflet. And you will also find the meeting minutes of the commission evaluating the risk benefit. And as mentioned initially, there were recently several changes that were introduced to the ATU process that I need to make you aware of. So the ATU framework was actually revisited last year with a number of key changes. So one key specification is now that pharmaceutical companies are required to submit a marketing authorization request within 1 year of the ATU being granted. So previously, the situation was a bit more ambiguous, and actually some companies just stayed in the ATU for several years without ever submitting a marketing authorization. And this is something that the authorities wanted to stop, because the ATU is supposed to enable early access in order to bridge the time it takes to evaluate the proper marketing authorization, but it's not supposed to be a process that goes on indefinitely. So nevertheless, if you actually make the count, you still have several years worth of earlier access. So you can actually start it 1 year before submitting the request for marketing authorization. Then if you take the average timing of a marketing authorization procedure, you can add another 12 to 18 months. And then taking the actual pricing and reimbursement process in France, we've seen that it can be 8 to 9 months, but there are also cases where it's longer. So for some products, the ATU can mean that you get reimbursed market access several years ahead of the regular process. And manufacturers now also have to submit a dossier detailing the target number of patients, estimated number that will receive the drug, and some information about the financial impact. So one thing that we haven't talked about, but that is a very attractive feature of the ATU, is that the manufacturer is actually free to set the price. So the manufacturer can determine the price, and the product will be reimbursed at this price. Nevertheless, you have to commit to reimbursing the difference between the ATU price and the price that will later on be agreed with the CEPS, with the pricing committee. And there is also a very important change. Recently, a cap on the possible reimbursement amount per patient has been introduced. So if the reimbursed amount per patient per year exceeds 10,000 euros, and if the turnover exceeds 30 million euros, the ATU holder is responsible for reimbursing the difference. So the difference between what was invoiced and the limit of 10,000 euros per patient. Nevertheless, drugs that have an annual turnover of less than 30 million are not subject to this rule and are still reimbursed at the price set freely by the manufacturer. And if you think about it, this measure, it was intended to stop some situations that were perceived as somewhat abusive by the authorities, where, for example, oncology drugs were charged for very high prices for longer periods of time. And here the authorities essentially wanted to limit the budget impact for the French social securities stemming from the ATU program. So you have to be somewhat careful with this and take this into account. But nevertheless, there is some scope, and anything up to 30 million euros is actually not subject to this rule. So most products would not necessarily reach this threshold, especially if you're operating the orphan drug space or smaller indications with significant unmet need. There is the potential to actually realize sales without being impacted by this threshold at prices that significantly exceed that limit of 10,000 euros per patient. And here, as promised initially, I wanted to show you a couple of examples of products that have received reimbursed access to the French market before FDA approval or approval in any other European market. So the first one here is Besponsa from Pfizer, and there's no particular reason I chose these, so there are actually many more examples, but I just picked out two that are fairly recent. So Besponsa received the cohort ATU authorization in January 2017. The cohort ATU was started in April, and the FDA approval was actually granted in August. So you can argue that the time lag is not that huge between the two, but nevertheless, it was actually reimbursed in France before it was in the US. And there are other products where the time lag is actually longer. And the other product is Rydapt from Novartis. So here, the cohort ATU authorization was granted in July 2016. The cohort ATU actually started in November, and the FDA approval was in April 2017. So here we have a slightly longer time window actually between the two. And in conclusion, the cohort ATU, it actually offers one of the best early access opportunities in Europe and worldwide. It enables manufacturers to realize sales way ahead of marketing authorization. It also has other benefits. So it is, of course, potential reputational gain. It offers you the possibility of also realizing additional data collection. So you could generate several years worth of real life data that you can then leverage for the negotiations with the French authorities, but also other authorities. And last but not least, you also already build a prescriber base, physicians that have experience with the product. So what we've seen is that for products that were in the ATU, once they have the regular approval, the uptake curve actually tends to be significantly steeper, and it's quicker to achieve uptake. Nevertheless, as we have seen, there are a few pitfalls that have to be avoided and that you need to be aware of. Of course, while the price in the cohort ATU is freely set by the manufacturer, there is the requirement to reimburse the difference between the price that was charged and the price that is later on agreed. And there is that sales cap that we have seen. So if you exceed the 30 million euro threshold and more than 10,000 euros per patient per year, there is the requirement to reimburse the difference. So this, of course, requires careful planning and a careful strategic analysis and pricing and reimbursement strategy. If you are at risk of exceeding that threshold, you have to develop plans for what you will do once this happens. And we've seen actually different examples. So some manufacturers would accept to actually go down to that 10,000 euro per year threshold, but others have actually decided not to do that in order not to jeopardize their later price negotiations. So some have actually started to supply the product for free then for that time period between the occurrence of the threshold being exceeded and the conclusion of the price negotiation. So there are different strategies that you can adopt. I don't want to go into all details because I think we're probably almost out of time for this presentation, but I just wanted to give you a flavor of the key advantages, but also the pitfalls and potential mitigation strategies associated with the cohort ATU. And then let's just quickly recap the key learnings before I would turn over to you for your questions. So as we've seen, is the ATU program offers reimbursed early access in France prior to marketing authorization. It comes in the two forms, cohort ATU and nominative ATU. Nominative ATU intended for a single patient and at the request of the treating physician, whereas the cohort ATU is intended for a group or subgroup of patients and can be requested by the manufacturer. Pharma companies receive reimbursement for drugs sold within the ATU at the price freely set by the manufacturer, but there is the threshold that we have discussed and the requirement to reimburse the difference between the ATU price and the price that is later agreed. It can be a very attractive option to realize early sales, but also the additional advantages that we talked about, data generation and building a prescriber base. Of course, we have to take into account the new requirements and especially the fact that there is a request to submit the marketing authorization within 1 year of the ATU, because the authorities have really instituted this as a temporary measure, but not a longer-term solution. So thank you very much for your attention. I hope that this was interesting and that you've learned something.
Could you summarize what people will learn on your EBD Academy course on pricing and reimbursement strategies?
Yes, sure, of course. So for this course, we will actually go through key elements of pricing and reimbursement strategies for all major EU5 markets and for the US for both the commercial and the government-sponsored books of business. And this will include looking at the pricing and reimbursement process, just to make sure that you're familiar with the key stakeholders and the process as such, but we will also look at some real-life examples and case studies of drugs that have been successful, but also some that have failed, and the learnings that we can derive from that.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much to everyone who attended today, and thank you very much, Justin, for your presentation.